Welcome to This Week in the Triangle. My name is Stephen Horn. I'm an independent journalist. So let's talk about some stories from the past week in the Triangle area of North Carolina. And first off, um, the most important, the most significant event that happened last week was obviously the tropical storm Chantal and the flooding and death which it caused. Unfortunately, there have been 6 deaths so far. Well, I say so far, but the the storm's over, so I think we have likely heard about all of the deaths, but it's possible that they'll come up with some later that could possibly have also come from the storm. But we have 6 deaths, and that is very sad for those who are in the Triangle area. 2 of those were in Mebane, just over the county line in Alamance. I think it's really important to go through these because each of these are tragic, and 4 of these were in their cars driving on the road. Because if you look at the warnings, they always say don't drive your cars through floodwaters. And there's a reason for that, is because it's very dangerous, and a lot of people overestimate their capability and their vehicle's capability to drive through flooding waters without getting washed into the road. So we have uh, an 83-year-old woman from Pittsburgh was swept away by floodwaters about a mile from Jordan Lake in northern Chatham County. So Chatham County and Orange County got some of the highest levels of rain, over 10 inches. We'll go over that a little later. 58-year-old woman from Person County. She was driving to Orange County, also caught in floodwaters in her vehicle. Uh, a 23-year-old from Graham. I'm not sure if that's a man. I believe that's a woman's name. So she was found in a pond in her vehicle south of Mebane and Alamance, and another man was found right near the same location, about a mile away. Once again, in his vehicle, caught in the floodwaters and drowned. And there are 2 more deaths on Jordan Lake. So a 25-year-old and 35-year-old man from Durham. They went out in a canoe on Jordan Lake last Sunday evening. When the storm hit, their canoe was found later that night, but their bodies were not found until Tuesday and Wednesday. So each of these cases, maybe something could have been done a little bit differently, because once again, flooding can be very dangerous on the road, even when you are in your car, or if you're on a boat in a lake, that might be a little more obvious. So there were tornado and flash flood warning alerts issued before the storm hit. I think there ended up being 4 tornadoes, but most of the damage and death was from the flooding. But a lot of the people here were still caught unawares, because the flooding was very bad. This wasn't even a hurricane. This was I believe it was a tropical depression by the time it hit land. Had been a tropical storm, but still we saw flooding levels in line with Hurricane Fran, which was a horrible hurricane way back before my time. That kind of set the previous standard of a really bad hurricane in the area. But this was a tropical depression, but it just dumped so much rain that it caused flash flooding, caused a lot of property damage and these lives lost. But people were taken unawares. There's a story in the Indy about about 100 people who were trapped in the second story of the University Place Mall in Chapel Hill. This is one of the areas of Chapel Hill, low-lying area near a creek that flooded. But the people, there's going to a movie or something, not expecting the mall they're in to start filling up with water. So the Haw River, the crest was reported at 32.5 feet on 4:30 a.m. Monday. I believe that was the peak crest, and that was close to the record-setting 32.8 feet from Hurricane Fran. So just right at the same level on the Haw River, the amount of flooding that was going on there. The Eno River was a record-setting 23.04 feet early Monday morning as well, and that was way higher than the previous record recorded, which was 14.91 feet in 1989. So the Eno River, this was way higher than the previous recorded crest. And so the Eno River and the Haw River are 2 different watersheds. So the Eno flows into the Neuse, goes out to the ocean at a different point than the Haw River. but you had a lot of smaller creeks and streams, where the all of this rainfall in the floodplains was enough to raise the creek to the level of the housing. This was in Chapel Hill. There are a couple creeks that flooded, caused a lot of property damage. And so we have a couple maps here. I don't know how you can see them on the stream, but this is the recorded rainfall. So the worst rainfall was in Chatham County, Orange County, and some over in Alamance as well, with rainfall of 9, 10. I believe that the highest measurement on this map is 12.9 inches, which is a whole lot of rain, but a lot of measurements over 10 inches in northern Chatham County and in Orange County as well. And that is where some of the worst damage was. So you can see here in Pittsburgh, north of there, around the Jordan Lake area, and then in Orange County. So down near Chapel Hill, high measurements of rainfall, and also in the northern area of Orange County, Hillsborough, and north of that. So in Durham, a lot of flooding was from the Eno River. Durham itself did not get as much rainfall, maybe 2 to 4 inches based on these measurements. But because all of that rain in northern Orange County and Hillsborough came down the Eno River, flooded out some of those neighborhoods there in Durham, even though they didn't get as much direct rainfall themselves. So there is a lot of flooding in Hillsborough. So the historic mill building flooded. Their water and waste treatment facilities flooded. There's a spill of raw sewage into the Eno River. They had a boil advisory, I believe, due to their water treatment plant being flooded. And so, just a lot of impact for the surrounding communities there. Flooding was in Chapel Hill was bad as well, along Bolin and Booker Creeks, which sort of run through the town. A lot of the neighborhoods right there in the low-lying areas, like Cameron Village, which apparently has had a lot of flooding issues in the past, even with storms that were not nearly as serious as this. If I recall correctly, the government even attempted to buy it at some point to tear it down, just because it is in a very flood-prone area. But even business communities that were not as prone to flooding were flooded as well, including Eastgate Crossing, University Place got flooded very badly. In Carborough, which is right there as well, their public works department was flooded. A lot of their equipment, the town police cars, were destroyed or damaged. About 1/3 of the Carborough police vehicles and a lot of the equipment in their public works department. Durham, a lot of damage as well near the Eno River, especially the Old Farm neighborhood. There were a couple stories reporting on that, just from that flooding, being near the Eno River when it's at 23 feet. That is something that I guess these neighborhoods were not built in expectation of. So once again, if there are flash flood warnings, I know sometimes you just get an alert on your phone and you're like, well, I'll just ignore that, because most of the time you're not actually in danger. But just keep in mind, don't try to drive through flood water. That is unfortunately how most of these people lost their lives. And maybe don't go boating either, but I think that's a little more obvious. So on to our next story, which is not as sad, not as serious. We have the Duke Medical Schools. This is a back-to-back expose. Just last week, we had a report from the Washington Free Beacon about the Duke Law School Journal and how they use some DEI criteria for accepting applicants. And here we have another report from the Washington Free Beacon again, this time on Duke University's School of Medicine. So this is a document regarding the appointment, promotion, and tenure of faculty for the Duke University School of Medicine. And this is about DEI. This is a DEI criteria that will get you a boost in your career at the Duke University of School of Medicine. So they don't call it DEI there. They call it JEDI, which apparently is cooler for them. They add 2 letters to the acronym for justice and anti-racism. But this is basically the same thing. They can a rose by any other name is still as thorny if you grab the stem of it. And so this document lays out the DEI what they can basically get DEI points for in their promotion, what they'll give them credit for having an impact. And some of these things definitely seem to be against the law, to be illegally discriminating based on race. Washington Free Beacon, you can look at their article. They talked to some lawyers to give their 2 cents. Um, there's some interesting stuff in there. So one of the reasons why this document says that they give these DEI career bonuses is to compensate Black, Indigenous, and people of color, BIPOC, basically anyone who's not white, for being, quote, frequently and disproportionately burdened by institutions and communities to represent the marginalized in committees, projects, tasks, and initiatives, aka the Black tax or minority tax. So basically, what it sounds to me is that non-white people have been advocating for the interests of their own communities, and the university basically said, we don't only reward for you to advocate for your own in-group to be the benefits for that in-group. We want you to have personal benefits as well for advocating for your in-group, as long as you're not white, of course. White people can't advocate for their in-group. So example of some of the DEI activities which the university, quote, wishes to recognize through the promotional process include DEI research. So that's all the way from peer-reviewed journal articles to social media and blog posts. So if you have an impactful social media or blog post pushing the DEI agenda, that can get you points in your promotion as a member of the Duke University School of Medicine faculty. So there's also DEI service, administration, and leadership. And that includes the recruitment, retention, and promotion of BIPOC non-white faculty, staff, trainees, and learners. So basically, that's definitely where the university could be getting in some hot water. If they're promoting people based on how many non-white people they recruit, that is basically an incentive for them to engage in illegal discrimination. And so there's the next category is DEI education. One of the examples is sponsorship of BIPOC non-white faculty, trainees, or learners, and grants, project, programs, policies. So once again, if you're rewarding your faculty based on the race of the students or other members that they're sponsoring for projects, for grants, whatnot, this definitely seems to be on the line or across the line in terms of illegal discrimination based on race. And the last category is DEI clinical, including health equity initiatives and public health interventions that address inequities and needs of marginalized groups. If you remember some from the pandemic, there are even some very overtly health equity where, being not white or being a member of one of these other intersectional protected groups would put you higher on a list to receive the vaccine or other, antivirus health initiatives where it's just overtly racial discrimination. And that, seems like it would fall under the cover of what they're seeking to reward here. And so Duke apparently took this document down from their website after the Washington Free Beacon reached out for comment, which doesn't look too good for them. And our next story here is from Wake County. So there's a story in the news last week about the Wake County public school system, being cut off from federal funding, from some grants. The grants are being suspended, over $8 million for the Wake County public school system. And it was almost reported in some of the news like this was specific to Wake County, but these programs are being suspended across the board. So in North Carolina, over $109 million in funds across the whole state is suspended, and that includes $8.2 million that were expected by Wake County particularly. So what were these programs for? So, well, there's education of migratory children, supporting effective instruction, English language acquisition, student support, and academic enrichment, 21st century community learning centers. So, some of these are pretty obvious. The education of migratory children, that is a little narrower than it might sound like. It's not just for any immigrants. It's anyone whose parents have moved recently and work in the agricultural or fishing industries. So that might cover a lot of immigrants who come here to work and are moving around if they're working in the agricultural industry. But it also could cover native citizens as well. if their parents work in agriculture or fishing and they've been moving around. But English language acquisition, this is obviously programs for children who do not speak English as their first language. Um, Almost certainly foreigners or perhaps the children of foreigners. This was $19 million in grants across the state of North Carolina because obviously it costs more to educate children in a school system that operates in English. If you don't speak English, it's going to cost more to educate the children. This is a burden for the benefit is for non-Americans, for immigrants, for foreigners, but it is being paid by all the taxpayers. And so this is a grant that the Trump administration is suspending while they decide, hey, does this align with our administration's priorities? And so some of these other grants under Title II and Title IV, they kind of have generic names, but they do appear to also be associated with kind of that same DEI agenda of either targeting low income, minority, or low performing students or low performing schools, which are often kind of the same conflation, which is likely why they're under review. And so this was, once again, the Wake County public school system and some of the school board meetings, people have been talking about, hey, you should stop pursuing this whole equity agenda because you could lose grants. Well, these grants are not specific to the Wake County public school system, and their suspension in Wake County doesn't seem to have anything to do with anything specific to Wake County because they're also suspended in North Carolina and across the whole state. And so that is all the stories we have for this week. If you want to check out the Substack, that's over at triangletrumpet.news. That is where I send a newsletter out every week. And now I do this broadcast as well, a little live stream to talk about these stories. But if you're someone who knows how to read, you can head over to triangletrumpet.news, get those in your inbox, get links to all the sources if you're the type of person who likes to source things. And as always, thanks for tuning in.